What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto trains himself seriously? Harem. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. It started out as another normal day for Konoha's pariah, Naruto Uzumaki. He had woken up early, eaten a cup of ramen, and rushed to the ninja academy to start learning. As he left, a shadowy figure flitted after him, staying up on the rooftops. Despite the young boy not knowing this figure was there, this too was a normal part of his life. Halfway to the academy, Naruto spots a group of children abusing a small fox. "Hey, stop that right now." The would-be ninja rushed over and slammed into the much larger boy who was kicking the fox. Sadly, his heroic effort failed, as the older boy didn't even flinch when Naruto's small frame hit him. Naruto bounced away, landing on his rear. The group of children took advantage of this, and surrounded him before he could get back up. The bully he had run into grabbed his arms and picked the 6-year-old boy up into the air. "Okay, we'll stop and pick on you. Mama says you're bad, so we'll be good guys for hurting you." With those malicious words, he tossed Naruto to one of his friends, who pinned the young boy's arms to his sides while holding him up. The first bully followed after Naruto, and slammed his fist into the younger boy's stomach. He pulled his hand back and did it again, grinning. One of the other children joined in, and that started a cascade. Soon, all of the children were hitting Naruto in the stomach, as well as in the sides and in the face. After several minutes of this pounding, the boy holding Naruto got anxious. Hey, I wanna hit him too," he whined. Another of the boys nodded and took Naruto, holding the poor boy upside down for a change of pace. This proved to be an unfortunate decision. Naruto's foot slammed into the boy's chin, making him bite his tongue and causing it to bleed. The boy dropped Naruto in shock, and the young boy managed to scramble away. He stuck his tongue out at the group of bullies, who were freaking out and trying to clean up the blood from their friend's mouth. The first bully saw this, and screamed at the group to get Naruto back. The boy took off, easily outdistancing the older boys. Sadly, he ran into another person, this time on accident. This person turned around, blinking in shock. He looked around for whoever had run into him, and finally looked down. He grabbed the back of Naruto's shirt and pulled the boy to his feet. "There he is." Naruto squeaked when he heard this, and dove between the stranger's legs and took off. The older figure shrugged in confusion. Strange kids these days. He looked back around to where Naruto had come from, and blinked again when he saw a group of 4 boys running towards him. He put 2 and 2 together and sighed. When the first of the boys reached him, he reached out and rapped him on the head, stunning the bully. He did this to each of them when they got in range. 4 on 1? That isn't fair. The older man snorted and walked away. Naruto had paused at the corner, and saw the older person stopping his pursuers. He grinned in relief when they dropped to the ground and started crying for their mothers, then hurried on to the academy. All of this had not been normal for Naruto Uzumaki. What followed was all too familiar to the boy. "You're late, Uzumaki. Don't bother coming to class if you can't make it on time. Get out." Those words chased the pariah out of the classroom. In tears, he went to the swing and sat down on it. "It's not my fault I was late. Those bullies were picking on the animal. I couldn't let them get away with that." He kept crying until he felt someone sit down on the swing next to him. Wiping his eyes on his sleeve, he looked over. The person had his eyes closed, but Naruto recognized him. It was the stranger from earlier who had stopped the bullies from chasing him. While Naruto was studying the person's face, the person spoke. "So, you going to explain why those boys were chasing you earlier? I'd feel really bad if you stole something from—" Naruto cut him off. "I didn't steal nothing. They were being mean to the fox and I told them to stop." Naruto crossed his arms and puffed indignantly, completely forgetting his tears. The other person laughed. "Good to hear that. So, what are you doing out here and not in class?" Without opening his eyes, the person pointed back towards Naruto's classroom. The younger boy felt his lip quivering as he was reminded of his punishment. "I was late, so the teacher kicked me out." Naruto began crying again, which panicked the older person. He got off his swing and knelt down in front of Naruto, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders and shaking him. "Hey, come on kiddo, stop crying. How about The person cast around desperately. Crying children were not something he was used to dealing with, and it showed. His next words would end up changing Naruto's entire life. "I know. How about I teach you whatever it was you would be learning in that classroom? At his words, Naruto looked up, using the feared puppy dog eyes on the person. Really? At the teen's nod, Naruto flung himself off the swing seat and onto the startled person. He pulled his face from the older boy's shoulder to speak. By the way, my name's Uzumaki Naruto, not Kiddo. And I'm going to be the next Hokage. His words were met with a wide grin. Well then Uzumaki Naruto, next Hokage, I am Ray Ranell. And I'm a wandering ninja. The now named Ronnel reached up and rubbed the back of his head. He stood up, Naruto hanging from around his neck. Say Naruto, how old are you? 4 or 5? He was curious because the boy was rather small and light. Needless to say, he was shocked when he heard the boy's answer. Shocked, and just a little angry. Nah, I'm 6. Ronnel grimaced. The only reason a 6-year-old would be this small was malnutrition. Deciding not to push things right now, Ronnel began walking around, causing Naruto to giggle. The young boy swarmed up and turned around, so that he was now sitting on the teen's shoulders, with his hands resting on Ronnel's head. After Ronnel checked to make sure the boy was secure, he asked a simple question. Hey, do you know somewhere that I can teach y'all without it becoming crowded? Naruto nodded in response to Ronnel's question, and for some reason, used the teenaged wanderer's hair as reins to guide him. They were quite the spectacle as they walked through the busy village, drawing whispers and glares. Ronnel noted the glares with some confusion. They arrived finally at a large empty field near a stream that had several poles on its bank. Ronnel hoisted Naruto off his shoulders and sat him on one of the poles and stepped back. Alright then, what was it your class was going over? Ronnel crossed his arms as he regarded Naruto with a cocked head. The boy fidgeted for a moment, striving to recall what the instructor had been talking about when he walked in. His small face lit up when he finally remembered. Jutsu. Sensei was talking about the different types and all. And katas. Something about katas. Ronnel listened to this rambling answer and tapped his chin. Shrugging, he decided to teach Naruto what he had been taught. This bit about katas would have to wait, since the teen didn't know how combat moves for swords and the like related to jutsu. After taking a moment to organize his thoughts, he sat down and picked up a leaf. Alright Naruto, since your lesson was to be about jutsu, I guess I'll start off by explaining what jutsu are. The boy leaned forward, his face intent as he listened eagerly. This Ronnel person hadn't been mean at all, and had helped him and cheered him up. Surely he wasn't going to be mean like everyone else was. Jutsu are how a shinobi controls various things. From enhancing our own bodies, making them faster and stronger and being able to see things that are far away, to controlling the elements themselves. Jutsu, or abilities, are divided into several branches. I'm starting off with an overview of those branches, then I'll give you a bit more detail about the primary 3 that most ninja use. He looked up at Naruto to see if the boy was listening. His hair stood on end when the boy leaned so far forward that he fell off the pole that Ronnel had set him on. The teen sprung forward and caught Naruto before the boy hit the ground. Naruto, you've got to pay attention to your surroundings, kiddo. He sat up and set Naruto on the ground, brushing his face and vest clean of dirt. After Naruto had done the same and sat down with his back against the pole he had just fallen off of, Ronnel sat against one of the other poles. He popped his neck and sighed. Now then, yeah. Okay, the main branches of jutsu are these. Taijutsu, which focuses primarily on hand-to-hand combat, and techniques that are helpful to that. Genjutsu, which is illusion techniques, designed to mess with your opponent's mind. Ninjutsu, which focuses on elements and controlling them, as well as chakra-consuming techniques that affect the environment and not your body or mind. He noticed a look of confusion on Naruto's face, and held up one hand. I'll answer questions in a second. Okay, those are the basic 3 types of jutsu. Then you have fuinjutsu, which deal with sealing, and iryujutsu, which is all about healing people. There are also weapon styles, like kenjutsu and bojutsu. The basic introduction done, Ronnel waved for Naruto to ask his questions. Nay, Ronnel-sensei, what's chakra? Ronnel's eyes widened at that. He blinked then rubbed his face for a second. It's probably the kata you mentioned, and you just misheard it. Chakra, to answer your question, is energy. This energy is used for most jutsu, no matter what type. Chakra is made up of a person's mental and physical energies. Thus, someone who has trained his mind or his body has more than someone who hasn't. And someone who has trained both has more chakra to use than someone who has trained only one. As a rule, the more chakra you have, the stronger abilities you can use. He grinned at Naruto's look of understanding. Okay, now I'm going to go a bit more into detail about the basic 3 jutsu types of nin, tai, and genjutsu. First up is ninjutsu. He held up the leaf in his hand. Ninjutsu is divided into 2 main categories. First would be non-elemental ninjutsu, like this. He made the leaf float up on a pad of pure chakra. The second is the branch of shoshijutsu, or elemental abilities. He focused his concentration for a moment, and the leaf split down the middle. Naruto had his eyes locked onto the leaf, his mouth hanging open. Cool, Ronnel-sensei. How'd you do that? Ronnel chuckled at the pleading pout that Naruto adopted. Wind chakra. It's my main affinity, and I'm quite good at it. That was a basic wind chakra exercise, and all I did was make a miniature blade of wind. But enough of that for right now, you'll probably go more in depth in class. Ronnel discarded the halves of the leaf and stood up. Naruto stood up right after him, and followed the teen to a tree. He watched as Ronnel placed his knuckles against the tree. Next up is the intro to taijutsu. This is hand-to-hand, physical strength. He pulled back and punched the tree, causing cracks in its bark to appear up and down the length. Then, the teen winked at Naruto, before punching the tree again. There was a loud crack in the air, before the tree fell sideways to the ground. Naruto was still wide-eyed. That was applying chakra to my fist. There's supposedly a woman named Tsunade who could completely destroy a tree like this with a single punch, but I don't have near that much chakra control. Taijutsu is about that. Enhancing your physical abilities, whether through a jutsu like that, through chakra enhancement like my punch, or through learning a martial arts style such as capoeira. Now, there is one final branch of the basic 3, genjutsu. Ready to see that? At Naruto's eager nod, Ronnel turned to him and looked him straight in the eye. The teen ran through a short chain of hand seals, his hands flashing faster than Naruto could track. When he finished, he muttered a short phrase softly, then grinned. Okay, try leaving this place. Naruto blinked in confusion. Why would Ronnel tell him to leave? The 6-year-old shrugged and turned and walked back to the academy. At least, he thought he did. For some reason, he ended up next to Ronnel again. Naruto blinked and turned, and ran towards the river. He leapt over it and began running in a random direction, only to bounce off of someone's back. Gee Naruto, keep running into me like that, I'll think you're trying to hurt me. Ronnel laughed. The younger boy was obviously fooled by the jutsu he had used. After watching Naruto run around like a headless chicken for several more minutes, Ronnel grabbed his shoulder and dispelled the technique. Relax Naruto. That was a simple genjutsu, one that makes the victim run around in circles no matter how hard they try not to. The boy shot him a dirty look, making Ronnel laugh harder. Okay. You suck at genjutsu. But relax, as an added bonus, I'll teach ya something. Ronnel could swear that at that statement Naruto's ears literally perked up. The boy adopted such a pathetically eager expression that Ronnel felt slightly embarrassed. Please Ronnel-sensei? There it was again, that blasted puppy dog eye jutsu. Ronnel swore to himself that only young girls and actual animals could pull it off better than the boy in front of him. I already said I would. Alright, listen up. The boy snapped to attention in front of Ronnel. When you know that you are caught in a genjutsu, there are 2 widely used methods for breaking out of it. The first, and easiest, is pain. If you can hurt yourself, that will almost always break you out of illusions. There are a few high-level ones that won't work on, but most Chunin don't know anything that's strong. Makai, most Junin don't for that matter. Ronnel-sensei. I don't think I'd like hurting myself over and over. Ronnel snorted when he heard Naruto. Oh, suck it up. Like I said, there are 2 ways. The second is slightly harder, but less painful. Okay, put your hands up like this. Ronnel placed his hands in the ram seal, and watched as Naruto copied him. This is the ram seal, the most commonly used seal for gathering chakra. Okay, now, close your eyes and visualize your body. Right above your pant line is a bluish orb. Naruto spoke up while Ronnel was taking a breath. And there are lots of little blue lines all over my body, and even little blue dots too. But Ronnel-sensei, what about that red orb thingy behind my blue one? Ronnel blinked. Ignore that for now, not important yet. Okay Naruto, you can apparently easily visualize your chakra network. Now then, pull some of that blue stuff out and push it into the seal. Then push it out through the seal and say Kai. What on earth is that red chakra? I've never heard of it before. He blinked when his hair lifted up. He looked at his impromptu student, his eyes widening. Naruto, use the jutsu. Kai, the boy shouted. A wave of chakra pulsed out from the boy, pushing everything away. When things settled back down, Ronnel coughed slightly. Naruto, I don't think any B-rank illusions are safe from the amount of chakra you just pumped into that. The boy rubbed his head sheepishly, then both males laughed when Naruto's stomach rumbled. Thanks for the help Ronnel-sensei. I'm going to go eat lunch now. The young boy took off like a bolt. Ronnel looked up at the sky, surprised to see that it was indeed nearing noon. He shrugged and was about to leave when the cloaked figure from before landed in front of him. Ray Ranell, you are to come with me. The teen sighed. I don't get a choice, do I? His answer was having his arm gripped, and vanishing in a swirl of leaves. Hokage's office. The cloaked and masked and Ronnel appeared, the figure throwing Ronnel forward. The teen put his hand up and caught himself on the edge of the desk before he ran into it. Geez guy, it little less easier wouldn't kill ya, he said, then blinked. He turned around slowly. There was a person sitting at the desk. He was older, Ronnel would guess in his late 70s. He was puffing on a pipe, and staring at the teen from under a large hat marked with kanji that read, Hokage. So you're the guy the kiddo wants to grow up to replace. The Hokage nodded. Yes, Ray Ranell, I am. My name is Sarutobi Hiruzen, and I am the Sandame Hokage. Now then, you and I need to talk. Ichiraku's ramen stall. Naruto slurped down the last of a large bowl of ramen. He patted his swollen belly contentedly, then stood up and helped the waitress clear his bowls. They began washing them. This was a normal thing, for the boy would often eat more than he could afford, so the ramen stall owner would have him wash dishes to pay. They were nearing the end of the large stack when a person entered the stall, grumbling about old men who spied. Welcome to Ichiraku's ramen, what can I get for you sir? The waitress, Ayame, asked, pulling out a small notepad and a pencil. Green tea and a chicken ramen please. Naruto's ears perked up, he knew that voice. He plunged the last of his bowls into the soapy water and scrubbed it furiously. Ayame came back to the rear half and was pouring out some green tea that had just finished steeping when Naruto nearly bowled her over in his haste to run to the front. She walked out after telling her father the order to see Naruto perched on the customer's shoulders. She blinked in shock. He did this earlier too. It's like he thinks I'm a horse. The quirk to the lips calmed Ayame, who was afraid the customer would hurt Naruto. Nay, Ronnel-sensei. Thanks for teaching me today. I can't wait to go back to school and show Sasuke Teme what I learned. At Ayame's curious look, Naruto pointed to the pavement outside the stall, where small craters were. Ronnel's chuckle had her looking back at the teen. So, you've already figured out how to enhance your punches. The boy nodded frantically, nearly bouncing off Ronnel's shoulders. A small bell chimed, and Ayame brought Ronnel his ramen. Well then Naruto, I have something you might like to hear. The boy looked down at the top of Ronnel's head, an eager expression on his face once more. Ronnel dragged things out, picking up his chopsticks and breaking them in half slowly. Itadakimasu, he said quietly before pulling out a portion and wrapping it around his chopsticks to place in his mouth in a small bundle. When he swallowed, even Tucci was leaning towards Ronnel slightly. The old man in the tower asked me something about you. Ronnel continued, before repeating his actions of rolling the ramen to eat it. He swallowed again and speared a piece of chicken, placing it in his mouth to chew. When he swallowed that, Naruto bopped him on the head. What did OGG want already? Naruto asked with a slight edge of expectation in his tone. Ronnel smirked and ate more ramen before answering. Well, he wanted to ask me to train you. He trailed off again, this time to drink some of his tea. He looked up, and noticed that everyone's eyes were on him. Luckily, he was the only customer in the stall, so Tucci wasn't going to mess up someone else's food. He sighed. No appreciation for setting up the moment. He grumbled. I agreed of course, if you do. If you agree, you'll be coming with me on my travels, and I'll be teaching you more. He got me to agree to have you back in a few years so you can spend the last year with your graduating class, so you can become a Konoha shinobi, and one step closer to becoming the Hokage." In the ensuing silence, Ronnel was able to finish his meal. He finally tilted his head back to look up at Naruto. He was shocked to see that the boy's eyes were brimming with tears. He was about to ask what was wrong when the boy spoke. "Thank you." Naruto could barely speak. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." The boy was becoming louder with each repetition, until he was nearly yelling it. Ronnel clamped a hand over Naruto's mouth and sent a confused look at Ayame. "Naruto, aside from my dad and I, and the Hokage and a couple of Anbu, he hasn't really had anyone who cared. And none of us can train him, or teach him, so you agreeing to is like a miracle for him." Ronnel blinked. He tilted his head. Does it have to do with a certain furry person? He thought, his mind flicking back to the conversation with the Hokage he had had. At Ayame's nod, he growled. Just because, this time, it was Ronnel who had a hand clamped over his mouth. He remembered that Sarutobi had said that Naruto wasn't to know about his burden until he was older. Ronnel sighed and nodded, and Ayame withdrew her hand. Ronnel did the same, but had to put his hand back as Naruto was still repeating, "Thank you," over and over again. The teen stood up and removed his hand. "Naruto, what do you need from your apartment?" The boy grew quiet. "Nothing, Ronnel-sensei. If we're going to leave, please let us just go." Ronnel was confused at the sudden loss of spirits. Is there anyone you'd like to say goodbye to?" Ronnel stiffened when he felt someone walk in behind him. He turned around, and for the second time that day was looking at Hiruzen Sarutobi. Naruto vanished from his shoulders, only to impact into the Hokage's legs. "Gigi-chan, thank you." The boy began repeating the word into the Hokage's robes. The elderly man nodded and stroked Naruto's hair softly. He looked up at Ronnel, his eyes carrying a message. "Look after him." Ronnel nodded to the unspoken plea. Sarutobi peeled Naruto back and knelt down in front of him. "Naruto-kun, Ray-san here is going to be your teacher for the next few years, and he travels a lot. You probably won't be back here until it's time for your final year at the academy. Are you sure you want that?" The boy nodded and rubbed his eyes with the backs of his hands. He turned and ran to Tucci, hugging the ramen chef's legs fiercely before slamming into Ayame. The girl managed to bend down and catch Naruto in a hug. "Be good, Naru-chan, okay?" She nuzzled his cheek, then stood up and set the boy on Ronnel's shoulders. The teen blinked. Everything had just happened inside of a few minutes. Ronnel winced when one of Naruto's legs hit a small seal, one that was freshly carved. It wasn't put on in ink like a normal seal, no, this was carved into his skin on his shoulder. Sarutobi had put it on himself. In the center was Naruto's name and around it was an array. Sarutobi wasn't a fool, to go about randomly entrusting Naruto to anyone, no matter how nice. This seal would compel Ronnel to protect Naruto above himself, even to the point of sacrificing his own life for Naruto. Ronnel sighed and looked at Sarutobi, who merely tilted his head in a challenge. Ronnel backed down, knowing he was no match for the Hokage. "Alright Naruto, I hope you're ready, because I'm leaving." The boy nodded from his perch. Ronnel sighed again. "Well then, Hokage-sama, Waitress-chan, Chef-san, see you guys in a few years." Ronnel turned and headed towards the gates, knowing that if he stayed, or more accurately, that if Naruto stayed, it would be harder for them to let them go. At the gates, Ronnel paused. "Remember Naruto, this isn't a permanent goodbye. We'll be back in a few years." The boy's reply was to bury his face in Ronnel's hair, crying. Ronnel fought back a sob of his own, cursing his emphatic tendencies, then took off. Naruto wouldn't be seen by the villagers again for several years, and when he was, he would be a totally altered person. Two figures stared at the break in the tree line before them. One was tall, easily near 7 feet tall. The other was around a foot and a half shorter. Both wore covering clothes, the shorter wearing a long coat with a hood that was pulled up, the other wearing a stark white trench coat with a black low-brimmed hat. The shorter one's head twitched slightly as he thought about what lay beyond the trees. "Ni-san, we're really back here, aren't we?" The shorter of the duo spoke quietly. The hat on the taller shifted as he looked over at the younger one. He opened his mouth to say that they didn't have to return, but as soon as he finished speaking, his shoulder flared in pain. He subsided with a small scowl as he rubbed the spot under his trench coat. He pulled the brim of his hat down further and sighed. "Yeah, oh Tuto, you're home." At those words, the younger one looked up nervously. Is Aniki leaving me? The shorter figure was now worried. His fears were assuaged when the other continued speaking. And I guess we'll have to find some place big enough for the both of us. Right? The trench coat clad one had caught the worry emanating from his companion and knew what it was about. Still, he knew that for worrying his traveling partner, he would be in a bit of trouble. He didn't know what it was until the boy glared at him before shifting behind and climbing up his shoulders and pulling his own hood down and plopping the hat on his sun-kissed hair. The boy then grabbed the dark brown hair that had spilled out when the hat was removed, getting 2 heavy hanks, one in each hand. These he used as reins to guide the other towards the gate. He paused and concentrated for a second, before 2 soft pops echoed around them. The taller figure winced as his hair was tugged and yanked. He resisted the strong urge to reach up and swat the boy off, instead heading for the break in the trees and the gate that lay beyond them. He winced again when one of the smaller figure's legs slammed down on the sore spot from earlier. He repressed another groan, knowing that what had caused the pain would be dealt with soon enough. At the gates, 2 men stood half asleep, leaning against the metal-sheathed wood. One had a senbon rolling back and forth between his lips as he chewed on it. He sent a scowl at the other person, the reason he was back on gate guard duty. Kotetsu sighed when Izumo snored lightly, showing that he was more than half asleep. Nothing ever friggin' happens at the gates. Everyone who wants to cause trouble avoids them and gets detected breaking in. The senbon chewing man ranted on in this vein for several minutes, before he noticed that someone, no, 2 people, were approaching. The reason the Chunin had been confused was that one of the people was sitting on the shoulders of the other. Kotetsu smacked Izumo awake as the 2 travelers arrived at the gate. The lower, taller figure raised one hand, showing a small piece of paper with the Hokage's permit seal on it. Kotetsu blinked and looked at Izumo, who took the paper and checked it with a few techniques. Finally, he nodded and handed the paper back. It's legit. They can enter. Welcome to Konoha travelers. The eternal Chunin gate guards turned and pushed the gates open enough for the figures to enter. After the 2 had entered, the guards pulled the doors shut. Izumo immediately leaned back against the door, settling down to return to sleep now that the momentary excitement had passed. Kotetsu rolled his eyes and went back to scanning the forest trail. Izumo's nap was interrupted when something small poked his leg. He cracked his eyes open and looked down, and blinked in confusion when he saw a fox sitting at his feet. He decided to ignore it and leaned back to return to sleep. If he had kept his eyes open a moment longer, he would have seen a human grin stretch the fox's lips before it growled quietly. There was a loud report. Kotetsu leapt to his feet, senbon gripped between his fingers as he looked around in shock. Izumo, what on earth happened? Did you hear that explosion? There was a snarl to his side, causing the senbon chewing Chunin to look at his partner. His eyes widened comically when he saw that Izumo was covered in Haruno pink paint, with some dripping down from his nose to stain his vest. The unpainted Chunin did a double take, then began laughing. Ha ha ha, looks like Naruto's back. Bet he was the one riding the other's shoulders. But who was that guy? Kotetsu kept laughing, knowing the only person who would be brazen enough to prank a Chunin. There was a small chirp at his ear, causing the man to nearly swallow his senbon in startlement. He looked to his shoulder and grimaced. A small jay was sitting there, with a definitely unjayish smirk stretching its beak. The Chunin barely had time to close his eyes and lips before the bird exploded, covering his face, hair, and torso in bright sky blue paint. Izumo reached up and wiped paint off his face. He opened his eyes and blinked the paint out of them, glad that Naruto had used non-irritating paint. He looked over at the senbon chewer, and doubled over laughing when he saw a blue stick sticking out from blue lips. Oh yeah, definitely Naruto's work. Things just got interesting again. By the way Kotetsu, you owe me 50 ryo. You lost, he pranked us first out of everyone. Kotetsu reached up and flicked the senbon out of his mouth, and wiped the excess paint off his face. He scowled and pulled out his money purse, and forked over the money. Then he slipped his pouch away, and placed another senbon into his mouth. The 2 men leaned back against the gate, now more alert due to the boy's prank. Wonder if he does that on purpose. Oh man Naruto, we've missed ya. Kotetsu resumed watching the trail, with his partner actually awake. Office of the Sandaime Hokage. Sarutobi Hiruzen looked back and forth between the 2 people standing in front of him. Tanned hands were laced behind blonde hair as the shorter person stood silent while the taller, darker-haired person told him some of what he had taught the younger. When the boy began miming a mouth moving up and down pointlessly, the young man reached out and smacked him upside the back of his head. Oto, get out of here. I need to talk to the old man alone for a bit. I know you're eager to go visit the Ichirakus, so go. The boy jumped up and down in place before rushing out. The two men sighed and grinned almost simultaneously. Then the younger man looked at the older man. All right, now that the brat's gone, we need to talk about this. He reached up and pulled down his trench coat and his shirt, revealing a seal inscribed on his neck. I brought Otuto back in time to rejoin with the last year of his age group, so it's time to pull this thing off. Sarutobi sighed and rubbed his head. He had known this would eventually come up, but Jiraiya had avoided all of his messengers. As it was, I'm sorry Ray-kun. The person who could remove it is missing in action. At best, I can alter it to where it only serves as a warning device in case Naruto is in danger. Ronnel blinked and nearly slammed his palms down on the desk. He forcibly restrained himself. Will it have the distance clause? Seeing the Hokage's nugatory headshake, the younger man sighed deeply, then nodded. Fine, alter it. Then we'll talk about Oto's skills, and a few other things that have come up that you need to be aware of. Sarutobi stood up and moved around his desk, opening up a small cabinet and pulling out a quill and some ink. He motioned for Ronnel to continue speaking. The young man launched into the full story as Sarutobi set to work. With Naruto, Ichiraku's ramen shop. Naruto slipped into the shop quietly, a large grin on his face as he surveyed the menu they had on the wall. He paused in shock when he saw the largest size available. They named a size after me, and it's twice the size of the large? Yata. He shook his head, the goofy grin widening as he kept reading. He blinked again when he saw that they had also named a dish after him. He grinned and sat down at the small bar and waited for Ayame to take his order. As he waited, he slipped his hood further over his face, hiding his blonde hair and the whisker marks on his cheeks. Ayame came out of the back, hastily snatching a pencil out from behind her ear as she went to take the newest customer's order. I'll take 2 Uzumaki-sized Naruto specials please. Something about the customer's voice was familiar to Ayame, but she couldn't quite place it. However, she did know that this man had just ordered 60 ounces of ramen. Sir, you do know that an Uzumaki-sized bowl is 30 ounces, so 2 would be 60? Do you want me to bring 1 out in a take-home container? Naruto, hidden under his hood, shook his head. I'll eat it all, you know that. The waitress tilted her head confusedly. She didn't think she knew this person, but there was still that niggling sense of familiarity about his voice. Then she nearly fell over in shock when the person flipped his hood up to reveal sun-kissed hair, cerulean blue eyes shot with tints of red, and 6 streaks, 3 on each cheek. She stared for several moments, unbelieving. Then, without saying a word, she walked over to a calendar and checked something on it. She spun on her heel and walked into the back. Father, Naruto-kun's back. After this statement, 2 things happened. From the back there was a loud clatter. The other was that Ayame launched herself from where she was standing, wrapping Naruto into a tight hug, smashing his face against her chest. A tall, rotund man in chef's garb pushed aside the flap to check for himself what his daughter had said. When he saw the blonde Jinchuruki gasping for air from his daughter's grasp, he laughed aloud, a deep bellowing sound. Naruto let the man laugh happily for several minutes, but he had a problem. He knew that he didn't have the money to pay for his order, considering that Ronnel kept all their money with him to prevent Naruto from spending it all on ramen. The boy scowled at this but accepted it. Now however, it hurt since he couldn't buy his ramen from the Ichirakus. A sudden grin split Naruto's cheeks as he came up with a solution. The sympathy card would work perfectly as both of the Ichirakus cared about him, and would let him get away with things that say others, say his adopted older brother, would not. He pouted, catching Ayame's attention as she watched her father laugh. Naruto-kun, what's wrong? The boy's lower lip quivered. Ronnel Aniki wouldn't let me have ramen. The lie rolled off his tongue easily, probably because Ronnel hadn't let him have ramen, or rather, wouldn't let him have the amount of ramen he wanted. Still, he didn't have to clarify, as Ichiraku immediately declared that as his first day back, this would be a celebration, and the boy wouldn't pay for his food. As Naruto cackled in his mind, he prepared an apology for what he had just gotten his brother into. Office of the Sandaime Hokage. Ronnel sneezed just before feeling a cold shiver run down his spine. Sarutobi, who had finished modifying the seal and was stepping back, looked worried. Catching the look, Ronnel took a guess. Relax, old man. I figure Ruto was talking with someone about me. Probably made up something for the Ichirakus. Hiruzen watched him for a moment, then nodded, satisfied that nothing had gone wrong with the sealing. He walked back over to his desk and sat down, watching Ronnel quietly. Finally, he steepled his fingers together and leaned forward. Ronnel, there is one more thing I would like to speak to you about. At the man's inquisitive look, Sarutobi continued. I want you to join the forces of Konoha. He missed Ronnel's eyes tightening. I can either instate you as a Chunin without trouble, or if you care to take an examination, I can probably get you instated as a Junin. He looked up and saw that Ronnel was standing up, pacing. Look, old man, there's a reason I am a wandering shinobi. My village was wiped out because of a traitor. The few of us who survived have all scattered to the winds. I wandered to find the man who betrayed us and slaughtered my village. I can't have that happen again. Sarutobi watched as the traveling shinobi paced back and forth, clenching his hands until his knuckles turned white. Ray Uzumaki Ronnel, like it or not, you're a true role model now. If you don't join Konoha, Naruto's one role model, the only person who hasn't left him in years, will be someone who doesn't find connections to a village important, someone who is shiftless. Ronnel froze in his tracks, turning a cold eye towards Sarutobi. Don't look at me, that's the way it is. You are his role model. Do you really want to show him that it's fine not to belong to a village? Ronnel brought his hand up, cutting off the Sandaime's words. I'll do it. But I'm not joining the ranks until Naruto does. Until then, I'll just help train him and his friends some. The man stood up slowly, stretching out. I have one more condition. I want all information you have on the cult of Jashin, and more specifically, Hidan. And I want first crack at any mission that involves Hidan. Sarutobi looked troubled by that. Before he could protest, Ronnel explained something that had the Hokage's eyes widen in shock. He gave a half nod, before letting Ronnel leave. The wanderer walked out of the building and raised one hand to his head. I need dango. He looked around sniffing the air, then set off in a random direction. Ichiraku's ramen shop. Naruto, Teuchi and Ayame were talking and laughing together when Ronnel showed up. Naruto blinked, looking at his sensei. His hair was scruffy and patchy, like someone had been messing with it. He had a line of blood trailing down one cheek from a slice just under his eye socket. The eyes were looking definitely harried as they scanned back and forth nervously. Old man, you don't serve dango here, do you? Teuchi blinked. Of all the things that they had been expecting the frantic-looking Ronnel to say, that was not on the list. He looked over at the menu list on the wall. Only basic sweet dango, why? Ronnel seemed to deflate and sank into the seat next to Naruto. The boy looked at his adoptive brother worriedly. I'll have 2 orders of that, and 2 to go. And no, I'm not going to explain. Naruto blinked as he sat up and looked at the slumped-over form of his teacher curiously. He'd have to get whatever had happened out of the older shinobi later. For now, he settled for watching as Teuchi moved back to the back of the restaurant and began frying up the dango. Ayame looked at them, also curious, but shrugged and went to take the order of another person who had entered the shop just after Ronnel. Teuchi returned with the dango a few minutes later, taking the money from Ronnel, who immediately ate the first 2 orders and stood up, grabbing the to-go order. A look to Naruto, and they stepped out into the street. Okay, we need a place to stay, Naruto. Got any ideas? The boy thought to himself while Ronnel calmed down, regrouping from whatever had freaked him out. His first warning that Naruto had an idea was when he felt the boy swarm up his shoulders again. The blonde boy grinned down at the older male's upturned face. I know a place. It's at the end of this road, but it's a long way down. Ronnel's lips quirked. He knew what the boy wanted. He shook his head and began walking, only to stop when his head began to be used as a drum. You're going to do that the whole way there, aren't you? Yup. Longer I take, the more you do it. Yup. Naruto grinned cheekily as Ronnel's left hand came up and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Fine. Hold on tight, brat. Naruto braced himself as he felt his brother charge up chakra into his legs. He nearly squealed in joy when he heard his brother utter the name of the jutsu softly. Shunpo. The duo vanished in a trail of dust. Half a mile distant, apartment complex. A casual observer standing near the abandoned apartment complex would note a long streak of dust rushing towards the dilapidated building suddenly. Such an observer would also note a joy-filled scream echoing down the street. Then they would see a pair of people skid to a halt in front of the building, throwing up a huge cloud of dust as the person actually moving twisted his feet at an angle, reminiscent of a skater braking on ice. Naruto clapped his hands happily from Ronnel's shoulders before plopping his hands on the older male's head and vaulting off of him. The two strode to the front door, with the white-clad man sighing heavily when he saw the massive chain across the door. "Well, it's a fixer-upper, that's for sure. Hang here a bit, Naruto. I'll go get the key to this thing from the Hokage." He turned and was about to leave when his young companion grabbed his hand and began dragging him around to the side, following the wall, towards a small alcove built into the building. Ronnel watched in amusement as Naruto began tapping the wall, wondering why the boy was hitting stones in a pattern that reminded him of the swirled leaf that was Konoha's symbol. His eyes widened when the wall faded around the last brick, which Naruto caught in one hand and made sure to bring low. "The old owner would lock me out sometimes, changing the locks whenever he found out that I had a key. Gigi got tired of me coming to him for a new key, so he showed me this. He said that this place was a really old building, like his teacher old. It was built so that people would be able to sneak out in case someone attacked the building. The wall reforms when this brick," here in his explanation the Jinchuruki wagged the brick that he had caught, "is placed back approximately where it was. Come on." Naruto stepped inside, looking at his brother expectantly, watching as said man followed him inside. The boy then held the stone in midair, letting Ronnel watch as the rest of the wall that had faded slowly came back into view, with the blonde boy barely snatching his hand out of the way in time to avoid having it caught there. "Impressive, Naruto. How many times did the old man have to explain that before you could remember what he was saying?" Ronnel's tone was light as he looked at his adopted little brother. Naruto scowled at him, but held up both hands, showing 8 fingers. After Ronnel finished laughing at his brother's sheepish look, he managed to gasp out another question. "And how many times did your hand get caught in the wall as the Fuinjutsu reactivated?" This time, Naruto growled at the older male, but relented and held up 5 fingers. That had Ronnel hit the ground, clutching his stomach laughing. A few minutes later, after Ronnel could breathe again, he leaned against the wall and looked around. The place was coated in a thick layer of dust, indicating that it had not been cleaned in a long time. Cobwebs hung in the corners, thick with spiders and insect husks. He sighed gently when he saw that the stairs leading upstairs were literally falling apart, with large stretches simply missing. He rubbed his brow as he fought off the impending headache. "Oto, you lived here. How many floors are there?" The boy thought for a moment, tapping his chin. "I think, there's this floor, and 3 floors up. And a really big basement." "Why?" "Trying to figure out living accommodations. Let's see, that basement is going to be our training center. This can be our cooking and dining floor. I'll take top floor, and you can have the floor under it." Naruto nodded to this, happy that he would be able to have a floor to himself. It would probably seem empty to the boy, but in time he would get used to it. "For tonight, we're going to focus on cleaning this place up. Repairs will come later. I checked the schedule while I was heading up to the Hokage's office. The academy starts in about a week." Naruto nodded again, then took Ronnel's outstretched hand and helped him to his feet. "Come on Aniki, we can spend tonight in my old room. It's on the 2nd floor. That was when Naruto turned around and saw the condition of the stairs. He blanched slightly until he felt his brother tap his shoulder and point to his feet, which were glowing a faint blue. The blonde Jinchuruki nearly slapped his forehead, irritated that he had forgotten that simple shinobi ability. He focused his chakra to his feet, and led his brother along the wall to the upper floor. When they arrived in Naruto's room, the two found a place that had been utterly stripped of everything. There was nothing but dust in the room, not even any debris, or remnants of any furniture. Naruto wiped at his face, telling his brother that dust had gotten in his eyes. Ronnel laid one hand on his shoulder and squeezed it lightly, hiding his anger at whoever had stripped the boy's room. "Get the bedding scrolls out and bunk down for the night, Naruto. I'll cook breakfast tomorrow, so don't worry about it." The younger male nodded numbly and grabbed a pair of scrolls out from one of his pockets. He stopped when Ronnel squeezed his shoulder again. Relax some. I know it hurts, little brother, but just remember this. You've got better stuff now, and they aren't getting anywhere near it. This made the boy smile slightly, before he nodded and unsealed the scrolls and laid out a pair of small cots and 2 sleeping bags. With a last look around his bare room, he burrowed into one of the bags and tried to put himself to sleep. Ronnel stepped over and brushed his adopted brother's hair out of his face, sighing when the boy opened his eyes. He reached down slightly and squeezed the boy's neck carefully, nodding to himself when Naruto drifted into sleep after the pressure point was pressed. Sorry Oto, but you need sleep, and right now you're too upset to get it normally. And I meant what I said on the road, Naruto. We'll find out who your father was. He said it softly, swearing it once more to the boy. Unable to sleep himself, he walked over to the windowsill in the room and sank down onto it, staring out at the village. That was one of their biggest reasons for actually returning, well, Naruto's at least. He felt that it was here in Konoha that he would solve the mystery of who his parents were, starting with his father. The man's eyes traveled back to his adopted brother and he sighed softly, remembering the one clue he had as to who Naruto's father was. Despicable author style, flashback technique. Naruto was curled up in his sleeping bag, having just finished his shift. Ronnel was perched up in a tree, scanning the area lazily while slowly carving a branch into nothing. His eyes snapped up at a small popping sound, but he relaxed when he realized it was the fire crackling. He settled back down, but froze when he detected another faint sound, one that had been masked by the noises from the fire. Dark eyes shot around the small clearing, latching onto a glint of metal that was rising above Naruto. The wanderer narrowed his eyes and sank his hands into the branch under him and swung down and around, launching himself towards the glint. His feet slammed into a hard chest, kicking a shadowy assailant, shoving him out of the clearing and against a tree. Ronnel landed on his feet in a crouch, straightening up and bringing a short sword out. He threw the blade without hesitation, piercing the attacker through the chest, pinning him to the tree he had landed against. The shinobi dashed over to the pinned attacker, thrusting 2 fingers into the man's throat, temporarily paralyzing him from the neck down. A kunai spun out from his pouch and pressed against the man's neck, the tip cutting into one of the folds of skin there. Tell me who you are and why you just tried killing my ward, or so help me I will make you bleed like a stuck pig from every part of your body. And then I will slit your throat. Talk. The man Ronnel had pinned to the tree spat on the wanderer's boot. He looked down at his boot and looked back up at the pinned man with disgust written across his features. Ronnel focused his will for a moment, with water soon flowing up from a bottle on his hip, wrapping around his arm then down to the blade. The water created a spike that dug through the skin on the man's throat, curving into a hook that pierced the flesh. The water hook tore back, ripping a strip of flesh away. A second kunai pressed against his stomach, and the man's eyes widened in fear when he saw water spiraling around his tormentor's arm. I'll talk. You fucking leaf Yaru. Of course I'd want to kill him. He looks just like his kami-forsaken father. When the Hokage hears that the rock destroyer has a son, stone will not rest until his spawn is dead. There was rustling behind the two as the rock ninja's yelling woke Naruto up from his slumber. Ronnel looked back through the trees to see his young ward sitting up and rubbing his eyes tiredly. Kuso. Gotta end this now. Normally I'd leave him alive, but he not only tried to kill Naruto, he's ready to get an insane tyrant on my ward's trail. I cannot let that happen, and not only because of this stupid seal. Ronnel sliced through the man's artery, catching the blood spray with the water around his arm. He blasted the bloody water out into a bolt that flew through the trees. After removing his short sword from the man's shoulder, he sheathed it and strode back to the campsite. Ronnel-sensei? Where'd you go? The boy looked worried, as if he was afraid that Ronnel had been about to leave. The shinobi rested his hand on the messy mass of blonde hair and ruffled it lightly. Relax kid, I had to take care of a little business. Nothing big. Naruto looked worried for a moment longer, then nodded slightly and settled back into his sleeping bag. Ronnel leaned against the tree, staring at the boy and thought. Just who is your father Naruto? And why on earth is he called the Rock Destroyer? The name made him picture someone large and brawny who shattered giant boulders with his fingers. Shaking that image out of his head, he sighed and looked up to the stars. Flashback technique. Release. Ronnel shook his head slightly while staring up at those stars from the window in the apartment. He had been able to talk to an acquaintance of his, and all he had found out was that the Rock Destroyer had a different cover name and hailed from Konoha. The wanderer turned away from the window, pausing as something that he could see at the edge of the window caught his eye. He leaned against the wall and looked out the window further, looking at the Hokage monument. Sarutobi looks a lot younger up there. He turned away and was laying down on his own cot when a thought occurred to him as he drifted into sleep. Another of those faces seemed familiar, but from where? I'll worry about it some other time. After checking to make sure that Naruto was asleep, the older man settled down into his own cot and drifted to sleep. Naruto woke up when the sun hit his face. He rubbed his eyes before standing up and stretching. He staggered into the bathroom and scrubbed at his teeth with the thin brush that he had purchased the day after returning to Konoha. The boy stumbled back into his bedroom and headed over to the dresser. When the drawer opened, Naruto grumbled again about evil older brothers who didn't appreciate the awesomeness of orange. He pulled out a blood-red shirt that had splashes of black and white mixed in. He followed that up with solid black cargo pants. He remembered Ronnel's admonition to hide his body as much as possible, to confuse possible enemies, and pulled out a deep green cloak. He folded the coat over his arm and wandered down to the main floor. Ronnel had been up before him as usual, and was already cooking. Naruto had found a stove that Ronnel was able to repair, so they no longer had to rely on the spit. Ronnel looked up and waved the boy to a seat at the table with the spatula. Bacon will be done in a minute, Naru-kun. Biscuits are already finished. You know where the orange juice is. The boy nodded and snagged a plate from the cupboard and a mug. He set them on the table, then walked over to the fridge and opened it, pulling out the orange juice jug. He sat down at the table and moved 2 biscuits to his plate before filling his mug with juice. He looked up and blinked happily when Ronnel set the steaming plate of bacon down in front of him. He scooped several slices and wolfed them down. He crunched through them with a delirious expression on his face. The older shinobi settled in across from his adopted brother and opened up a bag of white powder. Naruto rolled his eyes. Really, Aniki? Do you have to eat your bacon with powdered sugar? Ronnel snorted and sprinkled the sugar onto his bacon. He picked up a strip and munched on it, giving a contented sigh. You're addicted to ramen, so you don't get to say anything at all about my eating habits. And I heard something about me not letting you get any ramen. He stared at the younger boy, who blushed and hunched his shoulders up to his ears. Naruto pouted for a moment. I wanted ramen, and Ayame and Tuchi took pity on me and fed me ramen. Ronnel shook his head and munched down on more of his powdered sugar-coated bacon, which made Naruto shake his own head. After several minutes and another batch of bacon, the two sat back from the table and looked at each other. Ronnel peered out the window, then back at Naruto. Better hurry up, bucko, your class should be starting soon. And it wouldn't do for you to miss the first day of schooling in 6 years. Aniki, you taught me better than any of those people at the schools would. Be that as it may, you still have to go. Now shoo, make sure to take your scrolls, but keep the fact that you know Fuinjutsu a secret. Keep them in the bottom of your pouches. Yes, Ronnel Nissan. Naruto stood up and walked through the house, heading to his cabinet of supplies. He pulled out a few small scrolls out and tucked them into various pouches on a belt. He hung the belt on his waist, adjusting it so the pouches were at the small of his back. He placed several kunai and shuriken in the pouches above the seals, careful to keep them from cutting the seals on the scrolls. The boy reached into the back of the cabinet and pulled out a short staff with 2 iron bands, one on each end. He twirled it end over end, then set it against the wall cabinet door and pulled out a holster for it. He strapped the holster onto his back, then slid the staff into it. He sighed and walked back down to the main floor, where Ronnel was leaning against the front door. He had a small pack resting on one palm as he sipped on a steaming cup of tea. Ramen, I figured you'd get hungry halfway through class. The boy blushed and took the box. Ronnel stepped aside after opening the door. Naruto walked past his older brother, then froze. Ronnel was turning towards the door when the small figure slammed into him, wrapping him in a tight hold. The young man rested his hand on Naruto's head. Relax, Tuto. You'll get to know them, and they'll get to know you. But Aniki, Ronnel read the fear in his adopted brother's face. If they worry about you being the jailer of the single most powerful demon, then they aren't really worthy of being your friend. Besides, if you're worried they might dislike you because you hold another consciousness in you, make friends with the Aburame heir. They have hives living in them, so you holding one entity shouldn't bother him. He knelt down in front of the younger boy and tilted Naruto's chin so the boy was looking into his eyes. You'll do fine. I only suggest you avoid the Uchiha and the Hyuga. Both clans tend to be upright and pretentious. Be especially wary around the Uchiha, because his Kekkei Genkei, when he activates it, is incredibly annoying. The boy nodded and wiped his eyes. He drew in a shuddering breath and grinned at Ronnel. Nay, what will you be doing while I'm in class, Aniki? Ronnel grimaced at this. He sighed and ruffled Naruto's hair. Honestly, I don't know yet. The Hokage wants to see me once you're in class. Naruto nodded again, then hugged Ronnel again. He stepped back then scuttled outside, bending over long enough to pick up his ramen box. He stared at it for a moment, then looked back up at his older brother. Ronnel sighed before tossing the boy a small bottle of water and a pack of matches. We really need to get you away from that elementalist bent you've got going. The boy grinned and shook his head, then dashed off. Ronnel stepped back inside and closed the door. He walked over to the table and sat down at it, resting his forehead on his palms after setting his tea down. A few minutes passed, with him returning to drinking his tea slowly. He set the cup in the sink and gathered the rest of the dishes from their breakfast. He created a clone gathered of winds. The near-invisible clone set to work washing the dishes as Ronnel climbed up the stairs to his floor. He began getting dressed, keeping his colors to simple brown shades. The coat he chose, though, was a stark white trench coat, with a few seals on the inside to keep it clean of dirt. He settled it onto his shoulders and walked over to his weapons cabinet. He pulled out scrolls similar to the ones that Naruto had retrieved earlier. He placed them in pouches identical to what Naruto had, but his were on a harness. Out of the back of his cabinet, he pulled a pair of blades. One was a longsword, a long, straight, double-edged blade. This was placed in at his waist. He checked the second one, a claymore. It had been a while since he used it, and sure enough, it could use a sharpening. He shucked the coat off and put on the harness, then replaced his coat over it. He pulled a whetstone out of the bottom of the cabinet and began striking the blade against it as he walked out of the house. Ronnel ignored the strange looks that were sent his way. After all, it's probably not every day that they see someone carrying a giant blade around in one hand. He shrugged and kept walking. With Naruto settled in at the back of the class, glad that Ronnel had shooed him out early. He had arrived before anyone else did, and was able to watch everyone as they entered. He saw a boy with spiky hair, similar to his though of a brown shade rather than his own sun-kissed blonde, walking in with a boy who had swirls painted on his cheeks. That's probably the Nara and the Akamichi. He watched as the pineapple-haired boy sat down next to the other one, and promptly fell asleep. The boy with swirls merely shrugged and pulled out a bag of chips and began munching on them. That nails it. He's as lazy as the Nara we ran into over in Tanzaku, and the other has the appetite of an Akamichi. This thought was confirmed by the fact that the larger boy had pulled out 4 more bags of chips and was munching his way through those as well. Next to arrive was a quiet duo. The girl was wearing a heavy jacket that hung down to her knees. Her hair was a light color, lavender. Naruto blinked at the unusual shade, but when he saw the solid white of her eyes, he shrugged it off as a Kekkei Genkei trait. Isn't that one of the Hyuga? She doesn't seem to be pretentious like Aniki warned me she would be. He turned to look at the second arrival. The male half of the duo was so similar in outfit to the girl that Naruto nearly did a double take to make sure the girl hadn't moved as fast as he turned his eyes. But this boy's coat looked thinner, more akin to the trench coat that Ronnel wore than the heavy coat the girl did. He also had on a pair of round black glasses. Naruto could swear that there was a faint buzzing coming from the boy. He's got to be the Aburame. A small bug crawled out from the boy's high collar, confirming Naruto's hypothesis. The first 2 boys hadn't even registered Naruto's presence. These second 2 did though, the girl blinking and tilting her head slightly, then pulling her face down into her jacket. The Aburame though, sat down in a seat near him. Naruto cocked his head as a trio of small beetles skittered to him. He grinned and laid his hand down, letting the insects crawl onto his skin. They roamed up one arm before running down the other and going back to the boy. The Aburame blinked and tilted his head in recognition to Naruto. Said boy's eyes returned to the door in time to see yet another coat-wearing boy enter the room. This boy's coat seemed to be more like a parka, a fur-lined one. Naruto's eyes widened when a small furry head popped out of the back of this boy's hood and barked. Inuzuka, the animal living pack. He grinned, hoping that he would be able to get along with this boy as well. The Inuzuka sniffed the air, then seemed to turn his head to the dog in his hood, then turned to look straight at Naruto. The boy seemed confused, then shrugged and waved to Naruto before sitting down by the Nara and Akamichi. The next person to enter set Naruto's hair on end. Cold, I am better than you, stare. Hair that looks like a mallard's rear, onyx-shaded eyes, blue shirt with a fan, that has got to be the Uchiha. And unlike the Hyuga girl, I don't think this guy will be proving Ni-san wrong. After the Uchiha strode into the room like he owned it and sat down at a desk as if he had no rivals, it seemed like a floodgate opened. People began streaming in clusters, giving Naruto no time to grow accustomed to their faces. After an eternity, the teacher entered. He had spiky hair as well, of the same shade as the Nara's. Both had the same style of pineapple-spiked hair, though there the resemblance ended. The teacher had a large cross-shaped scar running across his face, with his nose being covered by it. He sat down at his desk and looked over the notes for the day when there was a loud clatter outside the room. Everyone but the Nara and the Uchiha looked up, and while most sighed and returned to what they had been doing, Naruto kept his eyes on the doorway. He was rewarded with the sight of two girls, one blonde and the other pink, a hair shade that truly made Naruto look twice, trying to enter the room simultaneously. For some reason, the door that had let groups of 4 in with no trouble, was not large enough for the two of them. This was probably due to the fact that they truly were trying to enter at the same time, not giving the other even the shortest of leads that would have let them in with ease. Finally the door frame creaked and bent, sending the two girls to the floor in an ungainly heap. As they struggled to right themselves, Naruto's thoughts registered them. Blonde hair in this village has to be a Yamanaka. Other than me, they're the only people I remember having a shade this light in hair tones. But who on earth is the pinkhead? Naruto decided to listen, in case he learned what he was interested in. The two walked over to the Uchiha, then began an argument. Out of the way, Ino pig, I was here first. Naruto sat back. Well, her first name is Ino, wow, they're uninventive in this village, sheesh, her dad's name is Inoichi. Which means, number 1 Ino, or Ino 1. Conceited much blondie? Not a chance billboard brow. I got here first, I get to sit next to Sasuke-kun. And the Uchiha's first name is Sasuke? Crow, sorry tribute to the name. I get to piggy. Sakura, I do. Sakura, cherry blossom, and she has pink hair, wow. Just, wow. Ronnel Nissan would be having a field day with this group. Several eyebrows around the room began twitching as the argument between the two shrill girls continued. And then he'd have a field day with them, and exhaust these wannabe kunoichi. Sheesh, would I have turned out like that if Aniki hadn't rescued me? The boy shuddered at the thought of being a louder person than he already was. Ino and Sakura, sit down and shut up. Naruto blinked. This was apparently the famed, big head no jutsu, that all academy teachers were required to learn. He was relieved that Ronnel had never learned that one, the man was loud enough without it. The girls squeaked and plopped down in 2 random seats, neither one taking the seat next to their precious Sasuke-kun. The teacher nodded once they were sitting down. Alright, now that everyone is in their seats, we have a new classmate today. What? Hey Iruka-sensei. Why does some snot-nosed brag get to join us? Isn't that skipping grades? The Inuzuka boy was the first to voice disagreement. Kiba, this person was told to report here by the Hokage. Not to mention that I probably already know more than the rest of these kids. Naruto kept his thought to himself though, recognizing the fact that the Inuzuka boy, Kiba, felt threatened and was trying to establish some kind of pack hierarchy. It has got to be an Inuzuka thing. Kiba grumbled but had to accept it. Iruka looked through the classroom, trying to find Naruto. He spotted him at the back of the classroom and gestured for him to stand up. Nay, Naruto, why don't you stand up and introduce yourself? Naruto could tell that it wasn't a request, as he stood up slowly. All eyes in the room flitted back to him, except for the Nara boy, who was asleep. The Akamichi prodded him to alertness, and whispered in his ear. The Nara yawned and turned around to stare as well. Naruto shrugged at this byplay. He settled his shoulders and began speaking. My name is Uzumaki Ray Naruto. I was born here in Konoha, but my adoptive older brother removed me from the village 6 years ago so he could instruct me in the shinobi arts. I returned last week and have refamiliarized myself with the village. I am currently living with my brother. My skills are those taught to me by various sensei while in our travels. My dreams are my own, as are my likes and dislikes. He nodded to Iruka and sat back down. The class immediately began murmuring to each other about him. Who wears a cloak in this weather? I know. And what's with that last name? He's got to be a Yamanaka with that blonde hair of his. I heard that he and his brother moved into an abandoned apartment complex and completely fixed it up. What about that his brother is really strong? If his brother is, and he's taught this Naruto kid for 6 years, he's bound to be strong too. Shut up and pay attention. The class snapped forward, their eyes locked on Iruka. His head reduced from the massive size it gained under the technique as he looked across them. He picked up a slip of paper and looked down at it. He seemed to raise one eyebrow at it, but shrugged. He was standing up as another man walked in. This man was dressed like a normal Chunin. He had silver hair, and was wearing a hat that made it stick at random angles. He clapped Iruka on the shoulder before looking at the class. His eyes tightened when he saw Naruto. Ah, Mizuki, just in time to help me pass out the pop quiz. Iruka handed the second man a sheaf of papers, then began passing the papers out. Mizuki started at the back of the classroom, meaning he began with the odd Hyuga girl. The man paused for a moment before handing Naruto his test. The boy could swear there had been a hand sign before he got his test. Naruto shrugged and looked down at his test, wondering what questions would be asked. Shinobi A throws a shuriken at a velocity of 22 feet per second at an angle of 30 degrees from the horizontal. Shinobi B throws a kunai at a velocity of 44 feet per second at an angle of 47 degrees from the horizontal. What velocity and angle will Shinobi C have to throw his senbon to hit both of the other shinobi's weapons? Naruto blinked and reread the question. He rubbed his forehead in thought and tried remembering if Ronnel had covered this. A breeze floated into the room, causing the papers to lift from their spots in front of the students. Naruto had frozen. His paper, despite the fact that he was right by the window, hadn't moved at all. The boy placed his hands under the table in a ram seal. He leaned his head against the table to hide his lips as well. Genjutsu. Kai, he spoke softly. His chakras sifted out and disrupted the illusions nearby. Iruka's eyes shot up when two cloaked men suddenly appeared in the back of the room. He saw the masks they were wearing and was about to settle down when he saw a small kanji etched into the forehead on each mask. Oh no, ni anbu? Does Hokage-sama know? The two figures looked at each other then vanished in gusts of wind and leaves. Naruto had not noticed the two, as his attention was on his test. Sure enough, his Kai had dispelled an illusion on his test. He scooped up the pencil on the desk and began answering. 1. What was the name of the Shodem Hokage's Kekkei Genkei? Oh yeah, these are so much easier. Naruto easily answered the questions on the true test. He was the third person to turn it in, the Aburame and Akamichi having finished before him. He blinked when he counted the finished papers on Iruka's desk. There was a discrepancy, 4 papers there, with only 3 people having gone up. Naruto turned around and was walking back to his desk when he saw what had caused the oddity. The Nara boy had fallen back asleep, but there was no test in front of him. The boy chalked it up as the Akamichi having taken his friend's test up when he finished, and sat down where he had been. A beetle skittered up onto the back of his hand that he set on the desk. Naruto raised his hand up so the insect was on level with his eyes. He brought up his other hand and ran one finger down the back of the carapace, which drew an odd buzz from the insect. He sat there, staring at the beetle, for several minutes. A loud shriek brought his attention up from it. Oh god, one of you bug freaks is enough. Don't tell me there's 2. Naruto lifted his head and saw the pinkette from earlier staring at him with disgust evident on her face. The boy decided it was time to speak again. Would you be quiet? This is a kakaichu, a special insect. Really Pinky, if you are going to insult insects, be sure to not insult one of the more prominent clans in your village. His tone was bored. Inside, his mental checklist ticked her off as a potential friend. Reacting like that to a beetle meant she would probably take his status badly. He stood up, raising one eyebrow when he saw they were the focus of the classroom. At the front, Iruka seemed content to let him handle it, going so far as to lay a restraining hand on Mizuki, who seemed about to say something. Naruto walked over to the Aburame boy and laid the hand with the Kakaichu on it on the boy's shoulder. The insect seemed to bow to him before skittering back onto the Aburame, disappearing under the boy's coat collar. "You can call me Naruto. Likewise, I am Shino." Naruto sat down next to Shino, then looked back. The pink-haired girl, Sakura, seemed to be in a state of shock. He rolled his eyes and sent a small gust of wind at her, causing her to stumble back and fall onto her desk. Iruka had watched silently through the situation, and looked to be pleased with the outcome. His teaching partner, Mizuki, had the trademarks of someone reigning in anger, something that confused Naruto. The boy sat back in his new seat and decided to be wary where the silver-haired Chunin was concerned. The rest of the class returned to taking their test. Naruto and Shino began a quiet discussion about insects of various kinds, the Jinchuruki quite pleased to find someone who shared a similar interest. The Aburame seemed slightly happier as well, judging from the strange vibrations that came from occasionally, which Naruto interpreted to be laughter. With Ronnel. Ronnel was standing in front of the Hokage, his claymore now sheathed on his back. The old man was tapping tobacco into his pipe, taking his time. The younger man kept his patience, staring straight ahead at a spot above the Sandame's head. Finally, the man looked up at the wandering shinobi. "Ray-kun, I wish to ask you something." The older man spoke slowly, mixing formality with familiarity. Ronnel's eyes dropped to the leaders, indicating interest. "Would you give up your wandering nin status and join Konoha?" The younger man's eyes rose, staring into the distance. His expression seemed troubled. "Hokage-sama, you know I was a shinobi of a village before, correct? What you don't know is that I didn't part amicably with them." "No, I am not a Nukanin. I say I did not part amicably because..." Ronnel trailed off, lost in the past. Sarutobi waited patiently, feeling that if he did, he would get the rest of the story. "Because there was no one to part with. The rest of my village was destroyed. I am the only survivor. Even the civilians were killed, Hokage, right down to infants in their cradles. I have not joined another village out of a fear that if I did, my history would repeat itself." Sarutobi stood up and set his pipe down on the mantel, then walked back to his desk. Rather than sit down, the older shinobi slammed his palms onto the desk. "Ray-kun, you do not only have yourself to worry about now. Naruto-kun is looking up to you for guidance. When he becomes a shinobi in truth, I would rather not have his role model be a wanderer. And I severely doubt that whatever annihilated your village could do the same to Konoha." He sank down into his desk, steepling his fingers as he regarded the young man in front of him. Ronnel sighed and looked up at the ceiling. His gaze dropped slowly to Sarutobi's visage. "Sandame-sama, I will agree, if you tell me what you know of a Jashin cult. It was one of their members who wiped out my village." The Hokage's eyes narrowed. "I know nothing good, I'm afraid. Jashin is a bloodthirsty demigod, one who delights in carnage and discord. The more trusted of his followers gain a twisted kind of immortality." He sat back in his chair, staring at Ronnel as he spoke. The young man's eyes had tightened when Hiruzen said that Jashin delighted in carnage, his mind flitting back to his village when he returned from his mission. He drew out his claymore and sat down, laying the blade across his knees. The longsword settled in the gap between the seat back and the cushion as he stared back at Sarutobi. Finally he sighed and nodded. "I'll join, but only because I don't want Naruto to grow up like me. The Wanderer's life was fine for me, but Naruto, he needs people around him, people he can grow to be friends with. Besides," he grinned, "Naruto still wants to take your place and be the strongest ninja in Konoha." The Hokage grunted. The man in front of him was evading saying something, but he wasn't the leader of his village for nothing. He decided not to push Ronnel for now. Besides, he just agreed to be a Konoha nin. I'll have a lot more time to talk to him. The old man stood up and walked to a cabinet and pulled out a metal plate on a blue band and a tan vest. "It is my pleasure to induct you into the ranks of Konoha's ninja forces, Ray Ranell. On my authority as the Sandame Hokage, I instate you as a Chunin shinobi." He handed the pair of items to Ronnel, then sat back down at his desk. He watched as the younger shinobi traced the design of the leaf symbol with the tip of one finger. Ronnel stared at the design for a long minute, then sighed. He pulled the band up to his neck and tied it on tightly. He stood up and laid the harness and swords on the chair and pulled on the vest. It was a little snug, but the tan matched in with his brown shaded outfit. The harness and weapons went back on, then the trench coat swept up into place. The new Chunin bowed to the cage. If that is all. At a nod, Ronnel began walking to the door. When he was at the doorframe, he paused, his hand resting on wood. Sarutobi-sama. If you get any information on the shinobi of the hidden hot springs village known as Hidan, please tell me. Sarutobi tilted his head slightly, then nodded again. Ronnel bowed again and strode out through the door. I need dango after that. Wonder where I can find some in this village. With Naruto. Ronnel would have been proud of his brother, student. Naruto had put up with the shrieking sounds from the pinkhead all day, though he really was contemplating slapping a silencing tag onto her mouth. Not even the blonde girl she had come in arguing with was as loud as she. He leaned over to his new friend. Nay, Shino-san, is her screeching normal? Hi Naruto-san, this is a daily occurrence. The boy responded with a controlled wince. The object of their discussion was currently screaming about how awesome her Sasuke-kun was. The Uchiha had just managed to nail 7 of the targets with kunai. The boy snorted and looked at Naruto. Beat that dobi. Naruto sighed at that. He had been termed the dobi because everyone else had attended the classes, while he hadn't. It would take him becoming Rookie of the Year to banish the nickname. And Naruto really wasn't that interested in showing off. But for some reason the black-eyed boy irritated him, so just once, he was going to put the boy down. Naruto stepped up to the line, then looked at the targets. There were 10 in all. The boy looked down at the ground, then judged the distance between himself and the targets. He turned around and walked several paces back, nearly doubling the distance to the targets. He reached into a pouch and pulled out several senbon. Eyebrows around him rose. Hey Ruka-sensei. He's trying to use a non-regulation weapon. The pink-haired banshee wailed, trying to discredit Naruto. Ever since he had put her down this morning, she had disliked him intensely. She nearly had a heart attack when Naruto snorted. Again Pinky, you're proving you aren't as smart as you put yourself to be. These are senbon, a favored weapon of hunter nin and medical ninja. Now shut up and watch. The boy tossed the senbon up into the air, which made everyone laugh. Hey Dobi, the targets are over there. Naruto ignored the jibe from the Uchiha. One hand rose to his shoulder, and his cloak spun back. His hand flashed down, whipping the staff out. It flickered back and forth among the falling senbon, then slid back into the sheath across Naruto's back as the cloak settled back in place. Only Iruka and Mizuki had been able to keep up with the rapid movements. Over at the targets, Mizuki blinked. The boy had moved far faster than the other academy students did, outdoing even Sasuke. What's more, there was a senbon set firmly in the bull's-eye ring on each target. Not necessarily in the exact center, but to have managed to hit the bull's eye at all with rebound strikes was impressive. He signaled Iruka, the discreet hand signs for a perfect score. Iruka nodded and marked it down, then smiled benevolently at Naruto, who had moved back to the circle of watchers. Said boy nodded back, glad that at least one of the teachers wasn't out for him. Lunch had been interesting, with Mizuki trying to bring Naruto some food. Shino had warned him away from it. Mizuki had been forced to eat the food, and had to rush to the bathroom. After a quizzical look at Shino, the Aburame had explained that his Kakaichu had smelled laxative powder on the tray. Naruto looked over to the targets, where Mizuki still looked uncomfortable. Serves you right Teme. After tallying everyone's scores up, Iruka looked pleased. He looked up at the class. Alright everyone, tomorrow we will have the taijutsu and ninjutsu exams. Go home and get a good night's rest, and be ready to go then. The class drifted apart, the dismissal in Iruka's voice evident. Naruto and Shino paused, each turning a different way. Naruto decided to risk it. He opened his mouth. Naruto-san, I know your status as the container. And it makes no difference to me. Naruto was stunned into silence. He turned around, but Shino was gone. A silly grin rose to his face. He knows and yet he wants to be my friend. Awesome. The boy headed home, the smile never faltering. Naruto woke up when the sun slanted across his eyes. He sat up slowly and rubbed the back of his hand across his eyes, clearing the grit that had accumulated there in his slumber. He yawned widely and stretched luxuriously, feeling his vertebra pop back into place with a chain of pops. The boy swung his legs out from under the comforter and stretched them out in front of him parallel to the ground. Finally satisfied, he hopped out of bed, landing with a muffled thud on the carpeted floor. His feet sinking into the dense carpet, Naruto trudged over to his wardrobe and pulled it open. He stared blankly at the garments hanging inside of it, his mind still not fully functional. Slowly, one hand crept out and pulled down a navy blue shirt. He shrugged into it and got out a thin, short-sleeved white button-over shirt. After a minute of staring, he took out a pair of black slacks. After tucking the shirts into the slacks and belting on a thin black band, Naruto reached in and pulled out the harness for his pouches and staff. After settling the harness into place, out of the cabinet came a midnight black trench coat with white waves on the edges. He slung this over his shoulder, not putting it on yet. Naruto walked over to the weapons cabinet and began pulling out his weapon scrolls and a staff. This staff was a little bigger than Naruto was, and seemed to shine silver. At each end was a heavy black band of iron. The boy gripped it tightly, and remembered what he had forgotten to put on. He walked back over to his clothing cabinet and pulled out a set of fingerless gloves with small rubber pads on the inside. The cloth of the gloves was white, with black bands of metal on the outside as protection. He slipped the gloves on and grinned when he picked up the metal-coated staff, pleased with the fact that it no longer slid in his hands. The act of testing out his staff had woken the boy up slightly, but it was evident that he wasn't fully awake when his foot caught on a stair and he flipped end over end downwards. His fall was cut short when a hand snagged the back of his shirts and jerked him to a halt. He looked around slowly and gulped. "No, she shouldn't be up this early. Well brat, it's your big day, and you can't even walk straight. Getting all excited about being teamed up with some hot little girl?" "Anko Ni-chan." He gasped her name, twisting in her grip. She was cutting off his airflow, and his face was turning blue. "Anko-chan, let him go, you're choking him." She blushed slightly and let Naruto go. His fall was promptly resumed as Anko had been holding him off the ground. There was a thud, and Naruto was staring at a blue-clad shoulder. "Now Anko-chan, you know that there are no hot girls in Naruto's grade. Well, except maybe that brunette Hyuga girl, but she sees our Naru-kun as a brother." "Thanks Aniki." Naruto grinned up at his adopted older brother. The older male snorted and rapped Naruto on the head. "Seriously, I know I trained you well enough for you to keep a hold on your weapon." Naruto blinked and looked at Ronnel's forehead. There was a bruise there. Ronnel jerked his head backwards over one shoulder, and Naruto looked. There on the floor was the staff. The boy thought back, and realized he had let go when he tripped. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. There was laughter behind Naruto. "And I thought you were good enough to dodge it, Ronnel." The shinobi looked over his little brother's head and stuck his tongue out at Anko. Her left hand flashed out lightning fast, the fingers snipping closed just in front of Ronnel's lips. He had twitched his tongue back into his mouth the moment Anko had moved. Between the two of them, Naruto squeaked, "Guys, let me go before you start flirting." Two fists crashed into the top of his head, sending him down to the floor. He rolled forward through Ronnel's legs, snatching up his staff. The boy stood up slowly, using the staff to pull himself upright. He looked at the two ninja and gulped. The two were advancing slowly on him, their eyes flashing dangerously. Naruto bolted through the door next to him, and shot to the table. He plopped down at it, and smiled innocently at them. Both of them glared at him before sighing. "We're not going to get you to believe we're not together like that, are we?" Anko glared at him as Ronnel spoke. The innocent smile on Naruto's face grew slightly wider as he nodded. The older male sighed deeply and shook his head before there was beeping sound from the left of the table. Ronnel walked over to an oven there and opened it, pulling out a hot pan of cinnamon rolls. Both of the people at the table had their mouths began watering as the smell from the rolls wafted to their noses. Four eyes locked onto Ronnel as he pulled a knife from a cabinet and began laying an icing onto each roll. When he moved them from the pan to a large serving platter, Anko and Naruto began pounding their fists on the table. A glare from the cook got them to stop, but not before the table had warped slightly. Ronnel laid the platter on the table in the center and sat down. He reached forward and snagged a roll, watching as the two others devoured theirs. He chuckled. That good, guys? He grinned when Anko kicked his leg and kept eating. Naruto ate 4 rolls and snagged 7 more, causing his 2 housemates to raise their eyebrows. He stuck his tongue out at them, jerking it back before Anko's nails could catch it, and then sealed the cinnamon rolls into a scroll he laid on the table. The boy stood up and pushed his chair in before walking to the door. He paused there, one hand on the doorframe. He looked back at Ronnel and Anko, who were still eating, and waved. Wish me luck. Instead of saying anything, Ronnel bent over and picked up the staff, which Naruto had forgotten again. He tossed it to the boy, who blushed as he caught it. Anko merely stuck out her tongue at Naruto, who grinned as he headed towards the academy. He bent over laughing when he heard a startled screech, and kept walking. In the house, Anko was glaring at Ronnel, who had her tongue caught between his thumb and forefinger. He chuckled as he twisted it slightly before letting go. Not so funny when it's your tongue, is it? She reached over and smacked the back of his head and twisted his ear. Now that wasn't nice, Ronnie. Keep doing that, and, this time, it was her head that was smacked. She pouted at him as he shook a finger in front of her face. Behave, Anko-chan. Well, let's go find out what the old man has for us today. The woman scowled and the pout grew larger until Ronnel tapped it with one finger. She sighed and stood up, then went to get ready. Ronnel got up and walked over to a counter and picked up a pot that had been brewing on the stove top. He set the pot down on the counter and got out 2 bottles, pouring the contents of the pot into the bottles. He closed the thermoses and set the empty pot into the sink. He leaned back against the counter and rubbed his eyes tiredly. He looked around the kitchen before walking up the stairs himself to get ready. Naruto strode into the classroom early as usual. He went back and sat down near the end of the room at what had become his seat in the past year. The would-be genin stared at the ceiling as he tilted his chair back. It's been almost a full year since I first came to this class, and I've made 5 friends. He chuckled and shook his head as he leaned the staff against the wall. From a pouch came the scroll with the cinnamon rolls sealed in it. He watched as the other students filed in, barely able to contain their excitement about this auspicious day. When Shino and Hinata came in, Naruto waved them over. The 2 accepted cinnamon rolls gladly. Hinata bit into hers and squeaked. NNNNNN na Naruto. Why you NNNNN need to TTTTTT tell why our BBBB bro brother that he makes RRR really GGG good rolls. The blonde boy blinked and deciphered the girl's stuttering. Finally he nodded. Of course, Hinata. She sat down beside him. Both of them turned when they heard a loud buzzing from Shino. The Aburame boy looked at Naruto from behind the dark glasses. That good, Shino? The Kakaichu host nodded and settled in on Naruto's other side. Who are the other 3 for Naruto? Naruto tilted his head as Shikamaru and Choji walked in. The sleepy genius walked over and sat down in front of Naruto's desk. Naruto watched as the pineapple-haired boy laid his head down on the desk. The blonde student jerked his head to get his friend's attention, then picked up a roll. He set it down on top of Shikamaru's open hand, then bent over and whistled directly into Shikamaru's ear. The spike-haired boy sat bolt upright, his hand shooting to his ear. Sadly, he didn't realize there was something on his hand, and ended up flattening the cinnamon roll on his ear. He glared at Naruto, who couldn't help laughing at the sight of icing and cinnamon powder dripping from the Nara's ear. The others were laughing from behind them. Naruto put one hand up placatingly and picked up a second roll. He placed it in front of Shikamaru. The boy grabbed the bottom of Naruto's coat and wiped his ear on it. He ignored the scowl Naruto sent his way and picked up his roll and bit into it savagely. Naruto shook his head again and went back around to his desk and sat down. He blinked and tossed a roll over to Choji, who took it gratefully. When Kiba came in, Naruto chucked a pair of rolls over to him. Kiba devoured the first and was about to bite into the second when Naruto's voice stopped him. Oi, dog boy, that one is for Akamaru. Kiba blinked and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, then held the cinnamon roll behind his head. A furry snout shot up and pulled the roll down. Kiba walked over and sat beside Shikamaru as sounds of noisy munching came from his hood. So, are you guys ready? Today is our last day here. And I sure as hell don't want to repeat. He high-fived Choji over Shikamaru's back, then spun his chair around and faced Naruto. "Nay, are we gonna get to see you put the duckass in his place again?" Kiba jerked his head around at their group. "No, you've been holding back since the first day." Naruto looked around, blinking. Everyone from the group was staring at him expectantly. "Kiba speaks for all of you, doesn't he?" At their nods, the boy sighed. Fine, I'll knock him down a peg or two. It shouldn't be that hard, especially if he's actually been showing off with everything he can do." He grinned maliciously. "Now then, who wants to place bets on our teams?" Shikamaru was the only one who pulled out money. Everyone else saw the boy genius place a bet, and didn't want any of it. Naruto grinned. "Ah, come on guys. So, Shika, what's your bet?" "Ino, Shika, Chotrio. And I'd say that Hinata, Kiba and Shino get put together." "You?" He watched as Naruto pulled out a matching amount. "With the way my luck's been since coming back to this toe, I'd say I get stuck with the Banshee and Duckass himself." A third pile was placed next to Naruto and Shikamaru's. Kiba's voice rang out. "No way, Naruto. They wouldn't put you with two people that you want to kill. I say that you get put on a team with Shino and Shikamaru." The money was collected by Shino, who stated that as an impartial judge, he would decide who won. As no one had really bet against Shikamaru, his money was returned. The group had to scatter to their seats when Iruka walked in. The class quieted down instantly when he showed up, fearing the big head technique he used when they didn't. A few paces behind Iruka came the silver-haired Mizuki. Iruka walked to the front of the room while Mizuki stood by the door. "All right class, today is the day of the genin exams. On the Hokage's order, we are foregoing the paper exam in favor of a series of practical exams. First up is the combat skills exam. Everyone, file outside." Iruka blinked after he finished speaking. The room was vacant. He looked over at Mizuki, who was spinning dizzily. "I think they're anxious, Iruka-kun." The Chunin spoke when he was standing upright. He proceeded out of the classroom while Iruka looked around at the empty desks. "Wow, they're all grown up. Hard to believe that we may soon be getting a new crop of ninja added to our ranks. I wonder who will pass." The spike-haired Chunin strode out, lost in thought. Academy training grounds. "All right class, first to fight is Kiba versus Tentronu." The feral-looking boy hopped into the ring. A plain, nondescript boy dressed in tans walked into the ring as well. "Hey teach, what are the rules?" Kiba barked out the question. Iruka tilted his head and thought for a moment. "No jutsu, and no partners in these fights. We want to see your physical combat skills." Kiba nodded and whispered something into his hood. Akamaru hopped out and trotted over to Naruto, who picked the dog up and set him on his head. They turned to watch as Kiba dropped into a low crouch. Tentronu moved into the basic academy taijutsu stance and several of the group of friends shook their heads, knowing what was coming. "All right boys, Hajime." Iruka's hand dropped down, and Kiba leapt forward. Tentronu ran forward, swinging one arm up to block Kiba's jump, his other preparing to strike. His eyes widened in pain when Kiba's sharpened nails lanced into the flesh on his arm. He tried punching anyway, ignoring the pain. Kiba's right leg snapped up and hit the other boy's fist away before his foot whipped out and slammed into Tentronu's stomach. The nails still in Tentronu's arm left bloody furrows as the boy was sent flying. He slammed into a tree outside of the ring. Kiba landed on the ground and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Did I go too far?" Iruka blinked and shook his head slowly. "I have got to tell Lord Hokage just how easily the Academy Taijutsu style can be beaten. That was just embarrassing." Kiba walked back over to his friends, where Naruto handed Akamaru back to him. The next few matches passed in blurs, the clan heirs easily winning their matches, though none quite as violently as Kiba. Choji's did come close though, because his opponent nearly crapped himself when the Akamichi boy tripped him and jumped up to do a body slam. Finally, there was only one clan heir left needing a fight, and only one student other than him who hadn't fought. "All right, now for the last match. Will Sasuke in?" Iruka paused to check over the list in his hands. Will Sasuke and Naruto enter the ring?" The two boys stepped into the ring. Naruto's group of friends were discreetly crossing their fingers as they watched the match intently. Sasuke settled into the interceptor fist stance easily. His cold black eyes watched as Naruto stepped on the other side of the ring lightly, the metal staff gripped in one hand. "Hey Iruka-sensei." The The Dobi is using a weapon. Naruto rubbed the bridge of his nose when this screech reached his ears. Before he could say anything, Iruka responded. Sakura-san, a weapon is perfectly viable so long as it is not thrown. Now please be quiet so we can start. The girl growled under her breath but went quiet. Hajime. Iruka's hand fell, and everyone tensed, expecting a repeat of the explosive start to the matches. Instead, neither boy moved as Naruto and Sasuke locked eyes. It's not too late to give up Dobi. The onyx-eyed boy said in a dead tone. The audience's eyes switched over to Naruto to see how he took that. To their surprise, he bent over laughing. Sasuke took a step back, thrown off by this response to his taunt. Is the Dobi laughing at me? His eyes tightened as a rage settled over him. He dashed forward, aiming to stop just outside of Naruto's range and make him overextend to try hitting him. Unfortunately for the Uchiha, he had forgotten that Naruto was holding a staff. The metal lunged forward and thumped into his chest, knocking him back several paces. He reached one hand up and began rubbing the spot, wincing slightly. All through this, Naruto had not stopped laughing. As Sasuke was recovering, the blonde-haired boy finally got his laughter under control. You're right, duckass. It isn't too late for you to give up. Naruto straightened up and slid his trench coat off. He tossed it over to Hinata, who caught it easily. The boy looked over at Sasuke as he began spinning his staff end over end. He watched as Sasuke's eyes trailed after one end of the staff. The black orbs locked onto the glint of metal. Suddenly Naruto lashed the staff against the ground, causing Sasuke to leap back. The metal was driven into the ground by almost half its length. Naruto stepped up onto it and stared down at Sasuke. This is how far above you I am, Sasuke. Normally I wouldn't make a big deal about it, but... His eyes flickered over to his friends and he shrugged. Someone asked that I make an exception. The Uchiha snarled and dashed forward, his hands lancing in to strike Naruto's legs. The blonde-haired boy flipped over Sasuke and landed behind him, their backs almost touching. He spun around and hooked one leg around the Uchiha's and pushed against his other side. Sasuke spun around Naruto's leg and thudded into the dirt. He came up and spat a wad of dirt and saliva out and growled at Naruto, who merely cocked one eyebrow. Show me what you got, Uchiha. Hey, Iruka-sensei, can the Uchiha and I go all out and have you grade us on our other categories from this fight? The two boys looked over at Iruka, who nodded. Naruto turned back to look at Sasuke only to be met by a fireball racing towards him. Reacting quickly, Naruto dropped to the ground. He wasn't quick enough to avoid the flame entirely as his shirt was burned away and he suffered mild burns on his chest. The blonde fighter flipped over and pushed off the ground, his leg flying up to intercept Sasuke's fist. The hand connected with the heel of Naruto's foot and a loud crack echoed through the area. Naruto jumped to his feet and winced. He's not too bad. If he wasn't half out of his mind from my taunting, this would be a lot more difficult. It doesn't help that he's fire-natured. Maybe I should have listened to Ronnel Nissan and tried to break my elementalist habit? He bounced on his feet, testing out what the impact had done. A slight sprain. Not too serious, but I'm going to be hampered by that. Alright, time to kick it up a notch. Sasuke blinked when Naruto's hand lashed out and grabbed the staff to his left. He braced himself for his opponent to use it, and tilted his head confusedly when Naruto tossed it out of the ring. He was about to open his mouth to ridicule the other when Naruto opened a small black scroll and nipped his thumb, swiping the bloody pad across the seal. Naruto caught the weapon that emerged from it and grinned. Sorry duckass, but my staff is a bit too unwieldy to use for my jutsu. Sasuke grimaced at what that meant before sliding his hand around to a pouch on his hip. He pulled out a trio of shuriken and flashed through a series of hand seals. Kaden. Hosenka no jutsu. He spat a trio of small fireballs from his mouth, flinging the shuriken directly behind each one. On Naruto's side, he flashed through his own series of hand seals. He had to grin when he heard Sasuke speak. Fei, some genius, hasn't even figured out that shouting the name of his tech is really a genin move. Let's see how he likes this. Fuuten. Kamaitachi no jutsu. Naruto lashed his weapon down, the blade-like form of the wood unleashing a trail of wind. The wind attack negated the equal-ranked fire attack, something that caused Iruka and Mizuki's eyes to widen. Naruto had to react quickly to deflect the shuriken that had been hidden behind the flames. He reached into his own pouch and pulled out his own trio of shuriken. Not bad, didn't expect the shuriken. Should have though. Alright, my turn to mess with my weapons. Fuuten. Yudama Furusagio. Naruto threw the weapons as a group, and watched as Sasuke dodged them. He grinned and channeled his will into the technique, the shuriken looping around in the air and hurtling back in at the unsuspecting boy. Over on the sidelines, Sakura had followed the weapons, distracted by the shine from them. She saw what Sasuke missed, and was about to shout out a warning when a large hand clamped over her mouth. She looked up into Choji's eyes. Now Haruno, no interference from the audience. He wagged a finger in front of her face and kept his hand over his mouth. In the ring, Sasuke had cocked his head and shrugged. The dead last was just standing there, inviting an attack, so he obliged and pulled out a cluster of kunai. Naruto formed a pair of hand seals, then went back to staring vacantly. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Kawarimi no Jutsu. He shimmered for a moment before steadying, which caused the Uchiha to blink as he threw the kunai, to which he chuckled when Naruto kicked a stone at him. Then the shuriken hit. He screamed out as the metal prongs bit into his flesh, one in his shoulder, the other two thudding into his lower back. He collapsed to the ground and was about to struggle up when he felt something press against his temple. Slam! You're dead. He looked up and saw Naruto standing there. What? How? We saw you get hit by those kunai. Naruto looked up at Ino and snorted. What you all saw get hit was a Kage Bunshin. I had Kawarimi'd with it and hanged it into the stone the clone kicked at Duckass here. Face it, your precious Uchiha lost. Iruka nodded. He lost, but you both pass your exams with flying colors. Naruto, how did that wind jutsu cancel out Sasuke's fire jutsu? Naruto beamed. Because Duckass weakened it. The Hozenka is, in essence, the Gokakyu jutsu split apart. The Gokakyu would have swallowed my wind sickle, but since each fireball was actually a third as strong as the wind technique, mine won. Naruto slid the truncheon back into the seal scroll and offered a hand to the Uchiha to help him up. He sighed when Sasuke slapped his hand away and struggled to his feet feebly. The blonde-haired boy slid behind the other and pulled his shuriken out of the Uchiha's back before sealing them into a separate scroll. Need to clean those before I put them back with the others. He walked over to his friends and looked at them. Well? Kiba slapped him on the back and grinned. Way to go, man, that's what I'm talking about. Similar compliments came from the others, with a stuttering Hinata handing Naruto back his coat. The other tests passed by in a daze for the blondie, his mind noting only when one of his friends was passing a test. The class was taken back inside as the teachers went to grade. Mizuki took the second half of the group to grade with Iruka taking the first half. In the grading room, Mizuki chuckled darkly when he figured out how he could get his scheme to work. On the front of Naruto's paper, he wrote, "Fail," in heavy kanji. Underneath it, he wrote a message to Naruto requesting the boy to speak with him after class. He exited the room at the same time Iruka emerged from his, the two Chunin nodding to each other. The teachers passed out the papers quickly, then dismissed the class. Naruto had flipped his paper over after receiving it, and waved his friends out before him. He waited patiently, ignoring Iruka's confused look. When Mizuki left, Naruto followed the silver-haired Chunin out. The man motioned for Naruto to enter an empty classroom. You're probably wondering why you failed, right? Well, it's because you can't manage to make a bunshin. I know it seems harsh, but you can't pass this test with a Kage Bunshin. The man patted the boy on the shoulder sympathetically. Naruto sighed. Well, there's always next year I guess. Maybe I can make a bunshin by then. He started to leave when Mizuki's voice made him pause. Now Naruto-kun, I said you couldn't pass this test. There is an alternative though. Naruto whipped around, a pleading expression settling onto his face. Mizuki chuckled in his mind at the gullibility of the boy. I can have him get the scroll, then burn him. I'll say the scroll burned when he did. I'll have the scroll like master wants, and I'll be the hero of the town. He explained the test to Naruto, who nodded eagerly and agreed. When the silver-haired man left, Naruto slapped his palm to his face. Does Mizuki think I am that stupid? The only scroll the old man would keep in his office is the forbidden scroll of sealing. I'd better let Gigi know there's a traitor. Maybe Aniki and Enko Nichan have an idea? He headed back towards his house swiftly. The apartment complex. Naruto pushed open the door and called out, "Aniki? Ni-chan? Anyone home?" He grinned in relief when he heard singing coming from upstairs. Aniki must be cleaning again. He hurried up the stairs to Ronnel's floor. Aniki? I need to talk to you, and it's really important." Ronnel tilted one eye down to Naruto, then dropped to the floor. He laid the cleaning rag in his hand on a table and leaned against the wall. "What's up, kiddo?" Speaking quickly, Naruto told Ronnel what Mizuki had asked him to do. The shinobi leaned against the wall and tapped his chin. "Here's what we'll do, Naruto-kun. We'll tell the Hokage, and request permission to set a trap." "Sound good?" Naruto smiled and nodded happily. Ronnel laid one hand on the boy's shoulder and the two vanished in a swirl of winds. Later that day, "Shinobi and Kunoichi, your task is to hunt down Uzumaki Naruto. He has stolen the forbidden scroll of sealing. I need not warn you of the danger that he tampers with the seal on him, and accidentally releases the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Go." The ninja vanished, hunting for the boy. Iruka had hung back, seeing Ronnel near the Hokage. "Ronnel-san, can you tell me what's going on? People should know better than to try tricking a fox, that's all I'll say." Ronnel chuckled then leapt away. Iruka watched him go, confused. His little brother just stole one of the most important scrolls in our village, and he isn't freaking out? Something is going on here. I've got to find Naruto. The man shook his head and took off, searching for the boy. Woods outside Konoha. Naruto slumped against a tree, panting. "I finally got it down. Wonder who is going to find me first, rather, after the Anbu up in that tree I mean." He chuckled, wondering if Mizuki had fallen for the deception. When there was a rustle behind Naruto, he guessed that Mizuki had. So, when he turned around and saw Mizuki, he blinked in shock. "Wrong sensei. Oh. Naruto, why did you steal the forbidden scroll?" The boy though fast. "Forbidden scroll? But Iruka-sensei, Mizuki-sensei told me where to this was when he told me the secondary mission." "Mizuki? Why would Mizuki tell Naruto about the mission? Naruto, what Ms. Ah, there you are, Naruto. Now complete your mission and hand over the scroll you have in your hands." "Crap, Iruka's here. Screw it, I'll burn him and say the demon killed him." Hehehehe. "Naruto, there isn't a secondary mission." Naruto turned back and forth between the two, adopting a confused look. "I'm sorry to deceive you, Iruka-sensei, but we have to get the traitor, and I want to show him my move." "But Iruka-sensei, Mizuki-sensei told me that I could become a genin if I mastered a move from this scroll and I did. Now I have to give him the scroll and show him the move to pass." Naruto turned and was about to climb up the tree beside Mizuki when Iruka's voice rang out. "Naruto, stop. He must be a traitor." The silver-haired man snarled when he saw that Iruka had figured it out. "Naruto, do you know why the village hates you?" He grinned when he saw Iruka's face pale. The man ran up the tree, only to have a Fuma shuriken slam into his gut. Mizuki dropped his arm to his side as Iruka coughed up blood. He missed the shadow that passed over Naruto's face, and the hand seals the boy made. Iruka didn't, and tilted his head slightly. He latched back onto what Mizuki had said. "Mizuki, you cough can't. It's forbidden." Naruto walked over to Mizuki. "Why, sensei? I'll give you this if you tell me why." The boy's voice sounded hollow. The silver-haired man grinned triumphantly. "Because Naruto, you are a demon. You hold the Kyuubi no Kitsune." A branch fell and landed on Iruka, dislodging the Fuma shuriken. A mouth formed on the branch. "Relax, Iruka-sensei, I know he's a traitor. And so does Gigi." Iruka looked up in shock. That was Naruto's voice, but the boy was standing by Mizuki, holding tight to the scroll in his hands. Iruka's eyes widened when Naruto slowly handed the scroll to Mizuki. The man grinned maliciously and his hands flashed through a chain of seals. Intense blue flames lanced from his mouth, incinerating the boy in front of him. "Foolish demon, I got you." He looked down, in his glee forgetting the man to his side. Mizuki pulled the scroll open, his head rearing back when he saw a picture of an orange fox on the papyrus. Both men blinked in shock when the scroll clearly said in Naruto's voice, "Boom." The scroll exploded, throwing Mizuki onto a tree, impaling him on a branch. Anbu units dropped down beside him. "Chunin teacher Mizuki, you are under arrest for the betrayal of Konohagakure, the attempted murder of Amino Iruka, the attempted murder of Uzumaki Naruto, and the attempted theft of the Forbidden Scroll of Sealing. Verdict: guilty. Punishment: Hokage-sama? Mizuki's eyes widened in fear when the Hokage stepped out on the ground beneath him. You know the rules, Tora-san. Execution. A wet thunk sounded out, and Mizuki's head dropped to the forest floor beside Sarutobi. The branch on Iruka's chest exploded into smoke, a hand reaching out of it to pull out the Fuma shuriken. Nay, Iruka-sensei, do I pass? The cheeky voice he thought he would never hear again came from the smoke. As it faded, Naruto was grinning. The boy helped Iruka to the ground, where the man knelt in front of the Hokage. Sarutobi blinked and gestured for Naruto to help Iruka stand. Amino-san, Naruto came to me with his older brother a few hours ago and told me of Mizuki failing him for using the cage bunshin. They then informed me that Mizuki had told Naruto that if he could steal the Forbidden Scroll and learn a jutsu from it, he would pass. We set this trap to catch the traitor, and it worked beautifully, albeit that we did not intend for you to get injured. Does the boy pass, Amino-kun? Sarutobi grinned, his eyes closing. With shaky hands, Iruka reached up and pulled his hite-8 off and tied it around Naruto's forehead. The boy shrieked with joy and tackled Iruka, who gasped in pain. Naruto? The boy blushed and stepped back. Gigi, can I take him to the hospital? Hiruzen nodded, and the boy helped Iruka limp towards the hospital, the duo speeding up when they realized that Iruka was in danger of blood loss. Your boy is growing up fine, Minato. How I wish you could see him. The man looked around the clearing and sighed. Damn, this means more paperwork. He rubbed the bridge of his nose as he gestured for the Anbu to clean the area and proceeded back to his office. That's all for now. If you enjoyed, then please like, share and do comments.